At the wedding, John left after getting a text from his first love. I gritted my teeth and called my arch nemesis. Will you marry me? I'll do whatever you say after we're married. The other end gave a low chuckle. Just don't regret it. I proposed to Eric. At a wedding that wasn't even my own. Eric didn't just say yes right away. He was suspicious. How do I know you're not just using me and won't kick me to the curb once this is over? Looking at the restless guests, I gritted my teeth and said, I'll do anything you want after we're married. Through the phone, I heard Eric chuckle softly. His voice was cool and laid back. Just wait, I'll come help you turn the tables. He wasn't kidding. Eric showed up and didn't just turn the tables. Everyone knew he was actually John's first love's first love. His status was way above John's. I just wasn't expecting him to show up so fast. Less than 5 minutes after hanging up, he appeared in a white suit, right in front of me. As he walked toward me, the hall went dead quiet, then buzzed like a drop of water in hot oil. Anyone would have thought he was the original groom. Seeing my surprise, Eric raised an eyebrow teasingly. What? Blown away by my looks? I blurted out, how did you get here so fast? Eric, I was planning on crashing the wedding anyway. I rolled my eyes, not buying his story for a second. The rest of the wedding went smoothly. The officiant gave a speech, we exchanged rings, and then said, the groom may kiss the bride now. I instinctively stepped back. My reaction made Eric's eyes darken. He pulled me close, looked at me with the playful eyes of a rogue, and said, Annie, if you're having second thoughts, now's the time. I forced myself to look back at him. Who said I regret it? Good. Eric looked relaxed, but his eyes were defiant. Then kiss me. I leaned up on my toes, tilting my chin towards Eric's lips. That's when I noticed how perfectly shaped they were. Maybe I was too slow because Eric softly chuckled. The next moment, he leaned down and his warm lips pressed against mine. We were so close, I caught the fresh pine scent on him. His big warm hand rested behind my head, his eyes smiling. Happy wedding. I actually married my arch nemesis. The guy I once swore I'd rather marry a pig than him. After the wedding, Eric took me to a villa. I looked up and asked, is this our new place? Eric unbuckled his seatbelt. If you don't like it, we can pick another place or you can redo the decor however you want. What I really meant was, are we living together? The villa seemed newly renovated. Coincidentally, it was just my style, clean and classy. Even the color scheme was all warm tones, which I loved. Aren't guys supposed to go for cool dark grays? I glanced at Eric. For a split second, I almost believed he really was planning to crash the wedding. I shook my head, thinking I was going nuts. Eric led me to the main bedroom upstairs. He pulled a shirt out of the closet, handed it to me. Take a shower and get some rest. Wear this for now. Then he headed out. I asked, aren't you staying here tonight? Eric turned back, let's see how you feel after some rest. Used to locking horns with him, I couldn't let him get the upper hand here. I raised my chin, I'm in great shape. Eric walked back, unbuttoning his shirt, one step at a time. You sure? I nodded, of course. Eric chuckled, very well. He tossed his shirt aside. Damn, he had a great body. Solid abs, all muscle. I swallowed hard. Honestly, I'd never seen a grown man's body up close. Even if it's just the top half. Eric's eyes darkened. The next second, he scooped me up and tossed me onto the soft bed. He was like a beast primed to pounce. Not used to this, I got scared and instinctively pushed against him. Eric glanced at my hands braced against his chest, smirked, regret it? He chuckled, rolled off the bed, picked up his shirt and started leaving. I stopped him, Eric. He turned back, face expressionless. Yeah? I asked him, don't you think I'm just using you? Eric answered with a question, aren't you? I said, no, I'm not. Eric's expression stayed cool. Okay. He turned to leave. I'll admit, his indifference hurt. I jumped off the bed and ran into his arms. I felt him tense up. I looked up at him from his arms, a hint of defiance in my eyes. Eric, don't you want your wedding night? Eric looked down at me, his eyes dark and complicated, his Adam's apple bobbed, his voice was husky. Now there's no turning back. 18-year-old Eric was sunny, handsome, bold. He'd dust me off and say, Annie, fear gets you nowhere. If someone bullies you, hit back, even if you lose. Once they feel the pain, they won't dare mess with you again. Later on, nobody dared to mess with me anymore. But it wasn't because I fought back, it was because Eric had my back. Thinking back, that was probably the most peaceful time between Eric and me. Now I wonder, when did things start to go south? Eric's raspy voice came from above me, sounding a bit annoyed. He grabbed my chin and said, Annie, you're spacing out at a time like this? Looks like I'm not trying hard enough. He said that and then bit my lip. 28-year-old Eric was all strength and energy. Eventually, he leaned down, swallowed my tears, and in a helpless, half-laughing voice, said, Gonna space out again in the future? Through my sniffles, I complained to him, You jerk. Eric wasn't mad. He lay beside me, pulled me into his arms, and gently patted my back. I didn't know how long it took, but after I calmed down, he whispered in my ear, This is the first time for me too, you know. I was stunned. I wanted to open my eyes and make fun of him, but I was too exhausted, so tired that my eyelids wouldn't lift. Before I knew it, I was asleep. When I woke up the next morning, Eric was already gone. The bedroom door opened, and Eric walked in, all dressed up in a suit. Seeing me dazed on the bed, he smiled and said, Awake? I made breakfast. Freshen up and come down to eat. Then he pulled a small suitcase from the closet. I asked, What are you doing? Eric grinned, Business trip. Some issues came up at the branch office, so I have to go handle it. He set down the suitcase and came to the bed, kneeling on one knee. He touched my forehead and asked, Think you can handle today on your own? I slapped his hand away and said defiantly, Who do you think you're underestimating? As if I have time for you. I've got lots of work today too. Eric nodded, Good to hear. He helped me out of bed and said it was time for breakfast. I jumped out of bed, and Eric's eyes lingered on my chest. I turned and threw a pillow at his face. Eric. He caught the pillow steadily and grinned, If I weren't in a rush this morning, that pillow wouldn't have gone to waste. He leaned over, whispering in my ear, I'll save it for later. Eric had made a simple breakfast, 2 fried eggs, 2 glasses of milk, and a couple of corn cobs. Even though he was in a hurry, he still took the time to make breakfast. It stirred up a strange warmth inside me. Maybe marrying Eric wasn't the worst choice. After breakfast, Eric left for his trip, and I headed to work. As soon as I got into the office, I bumped into Jenny. She dragged me into her office, shut the door behind us, and whispered urgently, Why are you even at work today? I laughed and asked back, Why shouldn't I be? Jenny glared at me. Don't play dumb. I was a bridesmaid yesterday. Annie, switching grooms last minute, were you just trying to get back at John? No, I said. Relieved, Jenny sighed, Good. You probably didn't check your phone last night either with Eric, huh? What happened? I asked. John and Vivian are trending again, Jenny said with a cold laugh. Now there's pictures as proof. They're all over each other. Seems like they're about to officially announce it. I just smiled, feeling no more waves inside. Jenny continued to rant, How do such shameless people exist? Vivian's parents took your family's property, and Vivian took your boyfriend. What kind of shameless creatures are they? I chuckled, It has nothing to do with me anymore. Jenny nodded, Exactly, good riddance. By the way, did you have breakfast? I got 2 baked sweet potatoes on my way. She handed me one through the packaging, grinning, See how good I am to you? New baked sweet potatoes are your favorite dessert. Honestly, I've never heard of it being called a dessert till now. I accepted it, still warm in my hand. The first time I heard baked sweet potatoes called a dessert was from Eric. That was when I was first brought back to the Annie family. I knew my aunt and uncle feared I'd reclaim the inheritance from my parents, but they had no choice but to take me in because of public opinion. However, taking me in was for appearances only. Behind closed doors, who would know how they treated me? Once, I got home late after some classmates bullied me on the way back. No one saved me any dinner. I didn't even dare to sneak into the kitchen to grab food. My aunt and uncle told me it was a rule in the family, no food after meal times. I knew it was just their excuse to make my life miserable, hoping I'd leave on my own so they'd look like they weren't the ones unwilling to raise me. Back then, I was weak, helpless, scared, unable to do anything but hide and cry. Eric climbed the wall to find me with freshly baked sweet potatoes heating up his hands. He handed one to me. I didn't want anyone to know how my aunt and uncle treated me, they'd only retaliate worse. So I said, "I've already eaten." But Eric pushed it into my hands. "Who said you didn't eat? This is dessert, get it? A post-meal treat." It was the best baked sweet potato I'd ever had. But that night, my aunt barged into my room and slapped me hard across the face. With a cold look on her face, like she was staring down an enemy, she said, "Annie, you're just like your mom, flirting with men at such a young age. Do you know Eric and Vivian have been engaged since they were kids? Are you so shameless you'd steal your own sister's future husband?" I didn't care what she said about me, but I won't let her talk about my mom like that. I held back my tears and said, "How dare you slander my mom? She's nothing like that." My aunt sneered, "Oh, she is. If she hadn't sneaked out for a date, you wouldn't have gone missing. And if your dad hadn't gone looking for you, he wouldn't have had that accident." I shoved her away, tears streaming down. "You're lying. Mom wasn't out on a date. Don't think I don't know. It was Grandma who caused their deaths." I ran out of the house crying. Eric lived next door, and I ran to his place, ringing the doorbell. It wasn't Eric who answered, it was their butler. He shook his head when he saw me, saying, "Eric's not home." Clinging to this last straw, I asked, "When will he be back?" The butler shook his head again, not sure. Eric's parents are really disappointed over this. They might transfer him to another school. That shook me, like my last hope was about to snap. I turned to leave, but then turned back and asked timidly, "Did Eric and Vivian really have a childhood engagement?" The butler gave me a helpless smile. It was just something the adults joked about. It's a new age. Who does arranged marriages anymore? So there was an arrangement. I tried to force a smile out of myself. In hindsight, it must have been an uglier smile than crying. There's not much salvation in this world. My world plunged into darkness again. A week later, Eric showed up at school. We kept our distance quietly. And the next day, I found out he was there to handle transfer paperwork. That evening, there was a heavy rain, and I heard Vivian crying in the room next door, wanting to transfer schools with Eric. Of course, my aunt and uncle wouldn't agree, especially since Eric's family had just gone bankrupt. I found this out later. Eric's parents weren't at school that time, probably busy dealing with the company going under. Vivian stormed out. Not sure why, but I put down my pen and ran to the window, yanking the curtains open. The rain had eased a bit, and I saw a tall figure by the iron gate. Holding a black umbrella, he looked inside the villa. Next thing, the gate opened, and a figure dashed into his arms. It was Vivian. I shut the curtains immediately. That rain doused any small spark of naive hope I had. I went back to my desk, picked up my pen. I knew I had to grow stronger because the revenge I needed hadn't been served, and those who deserved punishment were still roaming free. Eric restarted the car. "Want to grab dinner first?" Snapping out of my thoughts, I replied, "Let's head to my place first to grab some stuff." Eric said, "All right." Eric drove with ease straight to my apartment building. Suddenly, I realized I hadn't told him my address. How'd you know where I live? And he seemed to know his way around too, definitely not his first time there. Eric just smiled, unbuckling his seatbelt. Let's go up. I followed him, shocked when he pressed the elevator button for my floor. Eric, are you some creepy stalker? Eric turned back, looking offended. Is that how you talk to your husband? Me, then how'd you know my apartment's address? And the floor too? Eric gently knocked on my head again, laughing. You silly girl. Seriously, getting hit on the head and called a fool twice in one day? Where's my dignity? I've always lived alone, so it was just a one-bedroom apartment. After busying myself with wedding stuff, the place was a mess. I pushed Eric out. Maybe wait outside while I clean up a bit? Eric took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves. Why, something I shouldn't see? Not really. Eric walked into my closet, glanced around, thought maybe I'd find some guy's stuff you didn't want hubby seeing. He patted my head again, smiling. Good girl, knowing not to bring random men home. I swatted his hand away, rolling my eyes. You're insufferable. Eric laughed. That's insufferable? Maybe I need to show you what real insufferable is. Eric made me cry again, right in my own apartment. Afterwards, he pulled me close, satisfaction on his face, kissed my lips. Yep, your bed really is softer. Do I want to kick him out or what? I didn't expect Vivian to show up at the office. She barged in like she owned the place. I don't want John anymore. You can have him back. But you have to promise me you'll leave Eric alone. I dialed for my secretary. Lisa, kindly escort Miss Vivian out. Furious that I was dismissing her, Vivian's perfectly made-up face twisted with rage. Are you insane? This is my parents' company. I reminded her, I own 70% of this company. Vivian shouted, without my parents, this company would have collapsed long ago. You have no right to hog all those shares. They should have left you to rot instead of picking you up from that orphanage. I pointed up to the ceiling and casually said, there's a camera in my office. Super HD. Vivian looked a bit flustered for a moment, but then she regained her composure and said, you're lying. I shrugged, believe it or not. Just then, Lisa walked in, and I told her, no letting random troublemakers into my office without an appointment from now on. Lisa nodded slightly. Sorry, Annie. I'll make sure of it next time. Vivian gritted her teeth and glared at me with venom in her eyes. I smiled and pointed at the camera behind me. Vivian sneered, fine, Annie, but do you really think Eric likes you? He's only interested in your company shares. It's just a business marriage. I chuckled. I don't know if he likes me, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't like you. That seemed to hit a nerve, and Vivian was visibly upset. Lisa then said, Miss Vivian, if you don't leave now, I'll have to call security. Vivian wasn't scared of security, she was scared that there was actually a camera in my office. And there was, because who knows what kind of people will come into my office. Just as Vivian left, John showed up. But Lisa had wised up. Without an appointment, she wasn't letting him in. John had no choice but to call me from downstairs. Annie, let's meet at the cafe across the street and talk, John said. I replied, your first love just left. Instead of wasting time on me, why not chase after her? His confidence seemed to wane. Annie, I've thought a lot recently, and I realized it's you I love. Come back to me. I laughed. What made him think I'd just go back because he said so? Maybe I'd been too easy on him before and gave him the wrong idea. I said, you're such a fool, liking someone who doesn't like you. Just then, John's voice on the line changed. Eric? What are you doing here? I was startled and hung up, rushing out of my office. As soon as I stepped out of the elevator, I saw Eric standing face to face with John, tension in the air. Eric was taller and more muscular from years of working out, so he naturally had the upper hand. As I approached, both men started speaking at once. I ignored John and walked up to Eric. What brings you here? I asked. Eric held up an ID and marriage certificate, looking a bit annoyed. Annie, did you forget today's the day to get our marriage certificate? Quickly, I hooked my arm with his, smiling and patting my bag. How could I forget? I'm all prepared. My show of affection seemed to lighten his mood. Good, let's go get the certificate. John suddenly stepped in front of us, looking shocked and disappointed. You're getting married to him? Eric didn't say a word, just pushed him aside and kept walking with me. Don't bother with this nut job, he said. John stumbled, barely keeping his balance, and looked like he wanted to stop us again, but Jenny's security guards blocked his way. She had been enjoying the drama and said with glee, you cheated on my friend with Vivian while dating her, and now you're throwing yourself at her when she's getting married. Pathetic. John was furious, but the guards held him down, so he couldn't do anything. After going through the motions, waiting, signing, taking photos, getting stamps, swearing the oaths, I ended up married to Eric. Walking out of the bureau, I looked down at the red marriage booklet in my hand, feeling a bit unreal. Eric took it from me, stuffing both booklets into his jacket. Casually, he said, safer with me. I protested, why isn't it safe with me? He patted his chest where the booklets were stashed. I'm the one who needs protecting. Why did it feel like this guy was getting cheekier by the minute? Maybe because after getting the marriage license, Eric felt more secure about us. He became even busier than before, leaving early, coming home late. Sometimes, he'd pull me into a cool embrace in the middle of the night. Initially, I was uncomfortable, but over time, I adjusted. I even found a comfy spot where I could fall asleep instantly. Eric kissed the top of my head and said, by next week, things will be sorted out. We can go on a honeymoon. I opened my eyes, seeing his annoyingly handsome face under the soft night light. I can't go on a honeymoon right now, I replied. Eric asked, why? Is work that busy? I said, I have proof my uncle and aunt embezzled funds from the company. What are you going to do? Send them to jail? Eric questioned. I shook my head. My mom wasn't liked by her family because she married my dad. They did everything to push her away, even plotting to have me kidnapped, which eventually led to my parents' accident while they were looking for me. But that was my grandmother's doing, not my uncle and aunt. They just want my inheritance. Now that my grandmother's long gone, as long as they leave the company, I won't go after them. In the dark, Eric held me closer. His usually firm voice softened. I'm here. You can do whatever you want, he said. That newfound sense of security spread from my heart to my fingertips, and I hugged him back, nodding. Time seemed irrelevant. Before drifting off to sleep, Eric's voice came again. Annie, the night before I moved, I stood outside your door for most of the night. Why didn't you come out to see me? I was taken aback, fully awake now, as memories of that night with Vivian in Eric's arms flooded my mind. I asked, were you waiting for me that night? Eric let go of me and held my face in his hands. Our eyes had adjusted to the dark. I could see his expression mixed with frustration and helplessness. He said, Annie, are you heartless? It was pouring rain that night. If I wasn't waiting for you, then who? I replied, weren't you waiting for Vivian? Eric chuckled in disbelief, then suddenly seemed to remember something. He asked, didn't you see the note I left for you? More confusion hit me. What note? I asked. Eric said, the day I went to school to handle my transfer, I was worried about openly talking to you and causing any trouble. So I slipped a note into your math book since you didn't have a phone back then. When I was in school, my aunt and uncle didn't allow me to have a phone, saying it was against school rules. I bought my first phone with money I earned from tutoring when I was in college. I said, I never got it. Who did you ask to put it in my math book? Howard, Eric replied. I said, you didn't know Howard liked Vivian? Eric looked clueless. I didn't know. So you never saw the note? Never realized I waited outside your house almost all night? I didn't see the note. I just thought you were waiting for Vivian. After all, weren't you two promised to each other since childhood? Eric sat up in bed with a surprised yell. What promise? You can't say stuff like that, it's bad for relationships. I laughed at his outburst and said, why so worked up? My aunt told me you and Vivian were allegedly promised. Eric was still rather upset, as if someone had thrown a big scandal at him. You just believed her? Annie, are you kidding me? I patted his shoulder to comfort him. No need to get so upset. I didn't believe it at first either, but I even asked Charles, your family's butler, and he confirmed. Eric angrily replied, he lied. I never promised to anyone. Call my parents right now if you don't believe me. He reached for his phone. I quickly reassured him, it's late. Don't disturb your folks. I believe you, okay? Eric lay back down, pulling me into his arms again, insisting, I have to clear my name on this. I chuckled in his embrace and had one of the best nights' sleep. The next morning, as soon as I woke up, Eric pressed his phone to my ear. Eric said, it's my mom. I heard his mother's amused voice, Annie, did Eric wake you? I laughed and said, good morning. No, Eric didn't wake me. I'm up at my usual time. Eric's mom chuckled, sorry I missed your wedding, but we're planning another one in France. Everything is set, just waiting for you too. I whispered to Eric, were you busy with wedding stuff lately? Eric lazily replied, half wedding planning, half work. His mom continued, I heard you misunderstood that Eric was promised to Vivian in childhood? I assure you, no such thing. We aren't that close with your aunt's family. I laughed and said, I misunderstood Eric then. His mom laughed, no worries, misunderstandings happen. Eric values his reputation. Anyways, enough talk, it's breakfast time, see you soon. I nodded, okay, bye, Mom. His mom replied, goodbye. After hanging up, Eric raised an eyebrow, now do you see I was wronged? I remarked with amused disbelief, was a long-distance call necessary to clear up such a minor misunderstanding? Eric almost laughed, it's about my integrity, whether I've been faithful, how can that be minor? I said, all right. Eric, it seems you care about me a lot, right? Eric's ears turned red as he hesitated before nodding hoarsely. His shy look made me laugh, and I asked, if you cared so much, why didn't you look for me later? Eric countered, who said I didn't? My dad's business failed during sophomore year, and we had to sell everything and move back home. Dad had a small food factory there, our only chance to recover. That's when Dad started teaching me how to manage the business. 5 years later, we rebuilt our life. I went to your school to find you, but I saw you with John. Eric paused, then smirked, thankfully he turned out bad, giving me a second chance. Our company wasn't into shared info services at first, I added that just to get near you. People say we're business rivals, competing for deals. Honestly, Annie, have I ever sabotaged you? Whenever a project came up, didn't I always find ways to partner with your company? They can't seriously think their company needed help, right? I thought it over. Eric had indeed only taunted me occasionally but never caused me harm. His comments were more like advice, pointing out my work mistakes. Eric, you're sneakier than I thought. If I weren't, how would I win over my future wife? What if I'd married John that day? No way. Vivian would have caused chaos, and I would have crashed the wedding. He meant it when he said he'd crash the wedding. John tried reaching me several more times, but Eric chased him off each time. The last time, he even pressured John's company in business, finally making John back off. As for my uncle's family, once I showed evidence of their embezzlement, they had no choice but to leave the company quietly to avoid jail. The biggest surprise was Vivian. When she couldn't get close to Eric, she desperately clung to John. But John's mom wasn't easy to deal with and had no love for a former entertainer like Vivian. Somehow, Vivian crossed her, leading to a public statement from John's mom, Vivian wrecked my son's great marriage. Mistress trying to marry into our family? Never. This branded Vivian as a mistress in the media. John lost interest in her, but their twisted drama kept making headlines. None of this concerns me now. Eric and I just walked out of Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport. In 2 days, we'll have our wedding and start our honeymoon.